Preface. The symbolism of the moon is a fascinating subject for research, leading into many unexpected fields rich in significance for the spiritual life of our times. In the present volume, only a few outstanding features have been selected in order to emphasize the meaning of the initiation to Eros, which in the past represented an essential phase of development, but is almost entirely neglected in our day. We live in an age of executives and scientists, and our leaders are chosen from these ranks. Little attention is paid to the achievement of an inner development in the emotional realm. Indeed, it is generally taken for granted that an individual's emotions are what they are, and that they are not subject to development, certainly not to education. But to be childishly immature in one's relationships implies that one has only an undeveloped personality with which to meet all the intricacies which make up the problems of the world. Our modern difficulties, whether social, political, or economic, are in the final analysis human problems. Any fundamental discussion of these matters always reveals the same basic difficulty. If only human beings were different, more honest, more conscious of the effects of what they do, if they would trust each other more, if only they were convinced of the trustworthiness of others and incidentally of themselves, if only no one was trying to get ahead by undercutting another, then we could deal readily enough with material supplies and their distribution, which form the chief question of social, economic, and international controversy. But human beings are selfish and egotistic. Their love and consideration are shallow and unreliable, and pitifully narrow in their range. Being practical-minded people, we accept these characteristics. Only the dreamer and the unpractical person talk of utopia, where everyone shall be honest and shall love his neighbor as himself. True, human nature will never be changed overnight or in the mass. We have to deal with the world as it is, but that does not mean that nothing can be done about the emotional immaturity which underlies so many of our difficulties. Emotional development cannot be reached by thinking about the emotions, nor by a system of education rationally applied. The mind is developed by making the student think, and the body by making him exercise. Yet these statements, though true in one sense, are quite false in another, for no one can make a student think or exercise himself. It is only when the student voluntarily applies his mind to the problems presented to him, or disciplines his body to overcome the difficulties of his exercises or athletics, that development results. In a similar way, the prescribed course of emotional exercises can produce emotional development. The ancient religions of the moon goddess represent the education of the emotional life as taking place, not through a course of study, not even as the result of a system of discipline, though both these things doubtless entered in, but through an initiation. The interpretation of the moon mystery suggested in the following chapters links our modern life problems to those of the ancient peoples who recognized that in their day, as in ours, the world at times became sterile and was laid waste, not by war or pestilence, but because some essential fertilizing spirit had been withdrawn. Everything became dry and dusty and infertile. If there was food, it did not serve to nourish. We also have found that farm products in excess in one place do not nourish the hungry in another. If there was energy, it did not enable a man to support his family or build a life of dignity and culture for himself. A similar situation exists today, for promising young men and women are entering a world which lies under threat of annihilation. Their good gifts and high hopes may well be doomed to decay unused. But while we cling rather desperately to the hope that better arrangements, better man-made regulations may overcome these tragic discrepancies, and while the cynical remind us that war is the only occupation which is never oversupplied with the young and the strong, the ancients said, in symbolic language, that the moon goddess, goddess of love and fertility, was absent in the land of no return, and our modern poets dimly voice the same idea. Perhaps if more attention were directed to reinstating the goddess in the individual life through psychological experiences, the modern equivalent to the initiations of the moon goddess, a way of this impasse might open before us. One hesitates to dogmatize in these matters, Each human being is so blind and can only see that which is before his eyes. But the wisdom of the ages, represented in myths and religious symbols, has without doubt a larger vision, a longer range than that of any individual. If we can understand its teachings aright, they can be taken with a certain justification as a guide, in the sense of a signpost, which might point the way for us, for our predecessors. I present these thoughts about the meaning of the ancient moon initiations entirely undogmatically. They cannot be proved by any rational argument, but confirmation of the interpretation is accessible to the practicing analytical psychologist and to those who have been analyzed by the method Dr. Jung has evolved. Whenever such an analysis reaches a certain level of the psychological development, growing out of the exploration of the unconscious leads through experiences similar to the initiations we are about to discuss. Often the symbols which arise in the dreams and fantasies are strikingly similar to those of the old mystery religions, and the outcome in psychological development for the individual corresponds to the change which the initiation was said to produce. Naturally, this is evidence which cannot be evaluated except through actual experience, for when it is merely reported, it is always exceedingly unconvincing. When, however, it is met with, not occasionally only, but repeatedly, it forms a very powerful corroboration for the interpretations outlined in the following chapters, which point out a usable, if somewhat overgrown and unrecognizable path. I offer these reflections of a psychologist, hoping that they make clearer the intimations of a way through the darkness, which guides the traveler when conscious knowledge of his goal is lacking. I have written this book as a follower of Professor C.G. Jung of Zurich. His teaching permeates it from beginning to end, for it is to his genius that we owe the ability to understand the constructive meaning of the products of the unconscious. If these same symbols and rituals had been interpreted reductively, as for instance by the Freudian method, interesting points in regard to their constitution would have been found, but the whole meaning of the initiation would have escaped observation, for it was Dr. Jung who first discovered the key to those hidden treasures of the unconscious, and in making use of that key to unlock a new deposit of the world's treasure house, I want to reassert my allegiance to his method and my personal appreciation of his gift to his fellow human beings. I also want to express my thanks to the workers in another field. The psychologist is dependent on the anthropologist whenever he needs to discuss general products of the psychical activities of man. In compiling the anthropological data for this book, I am indebted first and foremost to Mr. Robert Briffault for his monumental work, The Mothers, Fraser's The Golden Bough, and Hastings' Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics have also been invaluable, and I wish to express my appreciation to their authors and to the many other authorities whom I have consulted. In addition, I want to express my thanks to the following publishers who have most kindly permitted me to quote from copyright material: the Abingdon Press, New York; the American Numismatic Society, New York; the Cambridge University Press; the Clarendon Press, Oxford; the Constable Company, London; the D. Appleton Century Company, New York; Faber and Faber, London; George Allen and Unwin, Limited, London; Harcourt, Brace and Company, New York; Jonathan Cape, London; John Watkins, London; the Journal of Polynesian Society, New Plymouth, New Zealand; Luzick and Company, London; the Macmillan Company, London and New York; the Methuen Company, London; Putman Sons, New York; and to Professor T.S. Eliot and Sir E.A. Wallace Brudge for permission to quote from copyright material. My thanks are also due to Dr. Edward Whitman for his translation of Dr. Jung's introduction and preface.